And so it was good to be here. Anyway, thank you all so much for signing on to this little journey we're going to travel through together this year. It's going to be hard and it's going to be worth it. At times, individually, churches, I think after today, you're probably going to go home and say to yourself on the drive, the other people in your car, you're going to say, that Stephanie Caro is adorable. She is, until we have our first coaching call. Or maybe by the second coaching call, because at some point in time, when we're struggling one-on-one with your churches, you're going to get pushed, and you're going to say, she is not so adorable. But it wouldn't be worth it if we didn't ask hard questions. We're going to look at things, and I'm going to ask things, and I'm going to be wrong, and you're going to be wrong, and I'm going to be right, and you're going to be right. The questions I ask is kind of, well, let me say it like this. You too can look this good after 36 years of youth ministry. This is how good you turn out. So that's a real career. That's an ad right there for being lifetime in youth ministry. You can look this good. I only sort of look like I'm 57. I'm really only 32, but it's been one too many lock-ins and one too many air mattresses for me. So, good to have you all here. I took a picture of us and posted it on Facebook, so you can see it on Facebook later. And I can't wait to have the picture of the last day we're together. Because at that point in time, we will have laughed and cried and pushed and pulled and learned and struggled. And yet I know in my mind, ending down in the chapel down the hall and having the bishop here and worshiping our God, all of that will be like an amazing microscopic picture of what this whole thing is about anyway, which is spending an eternity with the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so I'm excited. Okay, I thought it might be helpful for you to get to know a little bit more about me and where I'm coming from. As I said, I spent almost all of my youth ministry career in the Florida Conference of the United Methodist Church. My first church was in Illinois, and because my dad was a pastor, and so I got a little part-time job there. And the church council president came to me and said, Stephanie, you are, 20-something, and you can breathe. So you'd probably be a good youth pastor. Could you kind of be our youth director? And I didn't know any better, so I said, well, sure. And they were going to pay me like $20. So I was like, this is great. And so that's how I got started. And then I never wanted to be in youth ministry because I was going to make a fortune in the music business. So I got a music business degree. I didn't want to sing because, this is Nashville, so you should, singers are a dime a dozen. I was going to be like the Pharrell Williams, right? I was going to be the female Barry Gordy. Most of you don't even know who that is, but if you're as old as I am, you know who that is. And I was just going to make a lot of money being the manager of these people. And so took my first youth ministry job, and here we are. So this is a picture into Casa Caro. First of all, did I tell you that my husband and I have 7 kids? Yeah. Doesn't that explain so much? So they're all grown and gone. We just left them around the country. In my mind, I can picture the United States. So we've just left them where we lived. And so we left some in Chicago, so we started there. And then we left some in Florida. And then we got a couple in Texas area. So we have 7 kids, which is totally unimportant. The fact that we have 25 kids is the real deal. So we have 25 grandkids, and I have these things in fact, there's a couple of them coming up called Camp Grandma. So just explain a little bit who I am. Having grandma, who's a youth pastor and directed One Too Many Vacation Bible Schools, is either works for you or against you. So that upper left picture are two of my grandkids. They come quite often to Camp Grandma. We have a little mini Easter one coming up the week after. This one, they're real into Minecraft. I think they're in the witness protection program as well. So that middle picture is my husband, see, you'd like to think it was his birthday. It actually was. That's why he's wearing the hat. He hasn't quite figured out the fact that with phones come cameras. That picture can instantly go onto the internet. So he ran across this about 3 months after it was posted, and he said, "Who did that?" And I said, "Well, it wasn't me." It was. Okay, so, my mom. I told you you'd meet her. This is my mom. Her name is Beverly, and she is the typical Southern woman, you know. Well, y'all are, from Texas, you know, y'all say you're from the South, and we giggle, but you're from the South. So she's typical Southern woman, you know, bless your heart. Oh, that's so sweet, bless your heart, which you know, of course, translates into, you're so stupid, you know. So this is, she's so excited, though, now that we go to church together. So finally, after all these years of me being on full-time church staff ministry, when I am home on a Sunday, which is like once every 5-6 weeks, tomorrow's one of them, we all get to go to church together and sit together, and then we go out for Tex-Mex afterwards, which is, you know, the way church is supposed to happen. You know, church and then Tex-Mex. That's the way it's supposed to be. It's in Leviticus. Look it up. So, that's our dog. We never had a dog because we had 7 kids. No one told me that having a dog was going to be the best thing ever. Each and every time you walk in the door, they act like you're Jesus Christ, if in a good way. The car is, I just show the car and the picture of number 7. That's our youngest child. We can't remember their names, so we just number them. So she did that, and I just show her picture there everywhere because it annoys her. But I have to, that was my car that she did, so I just have to pay back somehow. And then that picture that's actually taken at Casa Caro. It's what staff meeting at my house would look like. I know they're wearing red wax slips. I can't remember why, but anywho, I'm coaching a church in that area, and instead of us they're just 30 minutes down the road. So we decided we'd get together and do it instead of doing it on the phone. Okay, so I'm going to show you a video clip. Some of you have seen this before. If you haven't, you're going to see it again. If you haven't seen it, you're going to see it the first time. If you did it before, it's too bad. You forgot most of it anyway. But it's called the Big Butt video. And I don't mean BUTT. I feel like now I have to censor myself more. I'm so sorry. The adults will explain it on the way home. So, but this is, I work with a lot of small churches. And, when you go into small churches, you hear, I just think and I go to a small church, you hear a lot of, but you don't understand. We're just a small church. But you don't understand. We don't have a budget. But you don't understand we're all volunteers. So I hear a lot of this, and I get it because, we're attending this little church. I get it. But let's just watch the video and see if any of this sounds like something that you may or may not have heard before in y'all's setting.
Got a big butt. It's gigantic. I know people about it.
Step.
You know what the funny thing is?
It's coming out of the projector.
Yeah, but it's just not loud.
put it on the projector.
Before you discard me or mince the disgusting notion of that, I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that possibly you have at least one big butt as well. Yeah, you like that? Hurts a little, huh? Let me tell you something. Let me just tell you something, okay? Everybody we know has a big butt. And more often than not, it's something that actually gets in the way of us living a consistent life for Jesus. I think you know what I'm talking about. I'm going to expound a little bit, okay? See if you can recognize some of these butts. But I have to work more. But my favorite TV show is on. But my kids have practice. But I got to tweet something. But it's such a beautiful day. But I'm just not in the mood. But I deserve a break today. You see, everything kind of interferes with my life of just living an authentic life for God, okay? And more often than not, it always has something to do with some sort of butt, okay? Even the littlest butt can be distracting. It really can. The littlest butt can make me think, I'm not going to pray today. I'm not going to think about it today. I'm not going to deny myself. I'm not going to read the Bible, blah, blah, blah. Whatever God asks me to do, I seem to have a butt for it and get away, okay? And the most horrendously big butt of all time is the butt that gets in the way of me just hanging out with God and reading His Word. It's true. Think about it. All the times you're about to open that, and all of a sudden a big giant butt gets in the way. But much like one of these. But I got a farm bill, but I got a cancer, but I read last Tuesday. But I got to check Facebook. But I don't like politics. But it's too hot in here. But I just don't like books. But I don't understand it. But it's boring. But what does that have to do with me in the 21st century? Those are some ugly butts, people. Let's just call them what they are. Ugly. Ugly butts. Okay? And there's a lot more to them, sad but true. Here's a list, although not exhaustive, of some of the most popular butts known to mankind. But I don't have enough money yet. But others will think that I'm a nerd if I carry the Bible. But they won't like me if I talk about Jesus. But I don't know if God will do what I ask. But I just can't get motivated. But I'm afraid. But I don't have all the answers. But the small thing was the same night as Monday Night Football. But can't I just let my life speak for itself? But I'm not happy. That's not my gift. That's the pastor job. But I don't know how to pray. But I can't believe that. But I don't know where to start. But everybody else is having fun. Butts abound, friend. Butt. Here a butt, there a butt, everywhere. A butt. Okay? And the most overused butt of all time, but I just don't have enough time. Really? Oh, come on. We have a lot of butts. God has given us a real simple word. Okay? If we learn it, and we share it, and we teach it, and we live by it, then see, God gets glorified, people benefit, and then we get blessed. That's why we do what we do. That's the lie behind the butt. Okay? And ultimately, that's the whole point I'm trying to make here, my fellow butt lovers, is if your butt is bigger than your why, then your butt's too big. Okay, it's time to, metaphorically speaking, snap into a Slim Jim. Okay, let's slap on some spiritual shape-ups and hit the road a little bit so we can just manage the butts a little bit. That's all we're trying to do. That's what we're talking about. Let's minimize the excuses. Let's shrink the butts. Shrink the butts. Say it with me. Shrink the butts. That's what we need to do. And you and I can do that together. We can conquer this. You and I can do it. We start today, okay? I know we can. Let's just do it. No ifs, ands, or... Yeah. Nah, you get it.
Okay, so here's what I want you to talk about at your church. The folks you came with, and if you're already sick of the folks you came with, then we have another cohort for that. But what I want you to talk about are, what are some of the big butts that you have encountered in your church setting? Excuses or even realities, but things that people will say, we can't do the best we can at children and youth ministry because we're just, but you don't understand kind of. So I want you to talk about that. Come up with a list of a couple. Take 3 minutes to talk about it, and then I'll get some feedback. All right? Everybody, break. You are talking with church folks about what can and can't happen in youth children's ministry. And the reason why I often use those interchangeably, by the way, is I know that we're going to focus a lot of language on youth. But one thing I've discovered in working with small churches is that I don't think the two ministries work really independently of each other in most small church settings.
Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
Sure.
I forgot to tell them the handouts.
You got a handout on your table. So if you haven't distributed the handout, you probably should. Okay, so we're going to... and so the reason why we're going to talk about children and youth ministry oftentimes together is because if you're a church of 100 members and you've got in worship on Sunday 50 or 60 people, you've got, maybe somewhere 7, 8, 9, 10 children and youth, and you kind of tend to be in ministry to them all together. So a lot of the principles are interchangeable. Anyway, let me hear back from you. What did you talk about were some of the big butts you come across? Let's hear it.
Sport,
Say that again.
but I have sport.
But I have sports. Yeah, you hear that in small, medium, and large churches. You know, what's so funny is I'll work with parents, you know, and I'm senior consultant for ministry architects, and we'll go into churches and they'll go, but you just don't understand, our kids are so busy. You know, they're in sports and they're in dance and they're in lacrosse and national quilting competition and the local spelling bee and Bible quiz, and I just don't know what's wrong with these kids today. And my first question will be, okay, parent, who signed all the permission forms? Because really, you know, okay, so sports. What else? What are some of the other buts?
Not enough money.
Not enough money. Yeah. What else?
But we don't have a van.
But we don't have a van. Yeah. Because apparently that will make things not happen. I mean, I don't even know how Jesus and the 12 got around, because, you know, they didn't have a van. And if they did, they would have been one person too many for the 12-seater, because they couldn't drive a 15-seater anymore, because you couldn't insure it. Okay, what else?
But we have you.
Yes, but we have you. We were talking about that just this morning. The beauty of and the difference of when you're the youth leader that's a volunteer versus when you're the youth leader that gets a paycheck. Also, the dynamic changes. Because at some point in time, when you're the unpaid leader, people just think you're at the right hand of Jesus, who is at the right hand of the Father. When all of a sudden you get a paycheck, apparently you go from being the greatest thing ever to having 25 bosses, every parent in your church. And they'll say, but we have you. What else?
Not enough parental support.
Not enough parental support. What else? But we've always done it this way. This won't work. We're just a small church. I mean, I can't tell you even, I've heard this feedback, but Stephanie, you just don't understand. We're a small church. Are you kidding? The little church my mom goes to, there's like 45 people that are there on a big Sunday. I get it. Easter's coming up, of course, and that's when my mom's little church, they'll get like 80 people in church that day. It's a big day. It's a big day, I'll tell you. What else?
But children or youth are too noisy during work.
But children and youth are too noisy.
They don't know how to sit still and
They
stay on their
don't.
phone.
Well, yeah. I don't know how to sit still and stay off my phone either. Fortunately, my little church will say, you know, whatever way you get to the Bible, you know, if you got your Bible on your phone or your tablet. There was, in the Florida conference, a bishop who's since gone on to the Lord, Cornelius Henderson. And he used to say the three greatest sounds in the church are pages turning, babies crying, and checks ripping. If you've got no noise happening in your church service, you just, you know, you got big problems. What else? What else? Okay.
They had one right here. Too much dog.
Oh yeah, it's too much work. Yeah, it's too much work. We had this conversation. Christy was saying how, God was calling her to, be the volunteer youth leader. She's got this full-time corporate job. And she said, I don't have time to be the, youth leader. And now we were kind of talking about, she started out when there was 2 or 3 kids. Now they got 25 coming on a Wednesday night. And she sort of feel like now she doesn't have time not to be the leader because it's so life-giving what they're doing. Okay, so let's look at some of the statistics that are currently swirling around what's happening in church worlds today. And of course, every other day a new report comes back, but these are my latest research within the last 6 months, because I'm about a chapter away from my latest book project being done. So this was stuff gathered for this, from the National Council of Churches and from that last edition of the Pew report that came out. So The median size church in America is only 76 people. So if you think about it, if middle of the road, the average size church is 76, well, how big are some of your churches? What do you worship on a Sunday?
100.
100? So you're in the top half size. Anybody else? 62, so that's really middle of the, kind of right down the middle. What else? 130. So when you think about it and you put it into perspective, people are often shocked by this statistic to find out that if the medium-sized church is 76, then they really can't use there being a small church as much of an excuse as they used to. Because really, they're bigger than they thought. Now, what makes this statistic so low? I think probably Tennessee and Texas share a little trait. When you drive through East Texas, you'll see the little church. Every single corner has a church like the full-on Gospel Lighthouse Assembly of God in Jesus right now tabernacle kind of church, where there's 15, 20 members, and it's going to stay there on that corner doing their thing until the last one dies, and then somebody else, the undertaker, has to turn out the lights, and they're done. So there's tons of those, and that is sort of what makes us look at, that's what brings that number down lower than we would expect. Now, at the same time, also, 90% of churches in America have 300 members or less. And so I find that when working with medium and large churches, they'll often say, but we're just a small church, when actually they average on Sunday, 250, 300, and they will function like a small church. And when they get clarity that they're not as small as they think they are, they then have to be kind of challenged and ushered into the fact of not using being a small church as an excuse for not pushing themselves harder to do what they need to do. Okay, only 1% of churches in America have 1,000 or more members. Now, the average Sunday attendance in America, and these aren't just United Methodist churches, so the United Methodist statistic is about the same here. Like Presbyterians, their average Sunday attendance, or their average size church is like 87. Episcopalians, they're really struggling. Their average Episcopalian church is like 59, 58 members. And so across the board, of course, in mainline denominations, none of us are surprised to hear that number is lowering. But the average Sunday attendance in churches around the country is 187. So how could the medium church be like 76 people, 75 people, and the average church attendance be so large? Partly because non-denominational community type churches are among the fastest growing in America, where they don't emphasize that church membership. Houston, where I'm from, of course, we're the land of Joel Osteen and Second Baptist Church. Second Baptist has 5 campuses. The smallest one is on the side of town where I live, and it's 5,000 members. And so they have as many problems as we do, I'll tell you though. They have, in fact, most of the same problems. They don't have enough money, they don't have enough volunteers, their kids are too busy, and they're not getting parental support. As far as membership goes, they're struggling because people come in the front door and they're losing them out the back door. And in a church that large, there's no way to keep track of who they're actually reaching. That's one of the beauties of where we're at. Okay, so in America, the average size youth ministry is 7 to 8 kids. Surprised?
Yeah.
Because when you go to a workshop, if you go to a big national conference like Youth Specialties, or to the Simply Youth Ministry Conference, which is published or sponsored by Group Publishing Group magazine. Both of their conferences are this fall. You would get the sense that the average youth group must be somewhere between 50 and 100. When really, most youth groups are like ours. And and when we were talking about you having 25 on Wednesday night, I am guessing that is probably definitely in one of the largest in the room that we're all dealing with. Okay, lots of churches are closing per year. 10, 15 years ago, this number in number 5 would have been reversed. We were still opening a lot of churches, but now 3-4 times as many churches are closing as are opening. A new report, it escapes me where it came from. This came out a couple of days ago that 85% of churches in America are in decline. Here, number 6 and 7, I think probably this statistic and this concept right now is worth the price of admission, and we'll talk about it several times over the year because of the challenges it brings. In America, the statistic that hasn't changed so much, 90 to 92% of Americans will say they believe in God or a God. Who the God is, that definition has changed. As of the, not 2010, but the 2000 census, 42% of Americans say they were in church on any given Sunday. So, the statistic now is, though, that as many people say they believe in God or a God, but only 18% of Americans are in church on any given Sunday. So we still have people who say they believe in something, but only 18% of people attend church regularly. The conundrum is that active in church is now considered attending one time a month. It's not good. It just take away all of the discipleship problems that you would have with that, all the grow in your own faith kind of problems you would have with this. But where those statistics and where that trend is a struggle is the fact that what's your first name? Nick, my new favorite person in this class because he said I was 27.
That's a free book, Joe.
That's right. So, whereas 10 or 15 years ago, if you would say maybe you are in youth ministry, what you're doing, 15 years ago, you'd be thinking, I've got so much to teach and so much to cover in youth ministry, and I've only got 2 or 3 times a month that I'll see these kids. Now, you've got all of this you want to cover in the scope and sequence of the Christian formation plan your church has, and on average, you've got 1 time or 2 times a month to cover that. Now, we have some kids. We were just talking about y'all like having a kid that would be there every time the door opened because it's a safe place. We all have that. But this is a real struggle, not just in youth ministry, but in how we approach our whole Sunday morning schedule, because it was so much easier when you could have the early service, Sunday school, and the late service. You could have youth group on Sunday nights or Wednesday nights. It was so much easier to plan Christian formation. To say, as a church, First United Methodist Church wants to accomplish these 10 things as our students go through the process of being connected to our church. But now, now you got to contend with the fact that Sunday school is not doing well. Nationally, anyway. Maybe your church, are Sunday schools still going pretty well at your church? Is pretty well attended, or some yes, some no? It's a struggle for United Methodist churches nationally. We have in churches that have Sunday school and then a children's church during a church service, there are now actually more children showing up in the children's church than there are in the Sunday school. And in youth ministry, kids are checking out right and left in attending Sunday school. So the burden then question becomes, as small churches, when are we going to cover all that we want to pour into our kids? You know, we have things at our church we want them to know about their faith, feel with their Christian faith, do with their Christian faith upon graduation. And now, we have 1 or 2 times a month to throw into the mix the matrix, and maybe they're not coming to Sunday school. One of the questions that we're having to ask ourselves as churches is then the burden upon what happens during worship has become even more important. And the reality, I'm not saying for all of you, but the reality by and large across United Methodist Church youth ministries in the country, the burden for Christian formation has shifted from Sunday school to youth group, where if you have so much you want to get accomplished, yet we just want to show up to youth group, really, play some games, have a hot dog, do a 20-minute devotional and call it a day. But yet, that's where we're spending the most time with our kids. What's some feedback? Tell me what you're thinking. Yes. What's your, Deidre, that's what I thought. Nice new hair, by the way. I saw that on Facebook. I thought, you look good.
The youth challenge, actually, but...
Where's the purple?
Oh, okay, it's in there.
Is it?
Yeah.
Looks good.
Thank you. I thought the same thing. I thought the youth group was going to be about the fun aspect. And we saw something happen. We saw our youth lead our youth group minds into a full worship service. And they will come and they are prepared for a 2-hour worship service every Wednesday night. And we're looking 18 to 25 consistently.
This is and we're not going to thank you for that, because it is kind of proof that, especially like high school age kids, middle school kids, it's still easier to get middle school kids to come to church. It's much easier than high school kids, because high school kids, especially A, can drive themselves, and B, there's so much demand for their time. High school kids now, though, have become, they don't need to come to church for the fun social aspect, because we all have this. That's how I knew your hair had been colored, from the challenge. And I've watched Brad go bald and then grow it back, and go bald and grow it back, and shave all kinds of weird things. And, I've got a Facebook relationship with so many of you here. So they don't need to come to church for that. Middle school kids, maybe a little bit. What high school kids are saying, by and large, is it better be worth it for me to come. It better be worth it. Now, I still think, we're going to talk about this more when we get to our day about Christian formation planning, because I don't have the answers, because the answers are no longer similar. Do you know what I'm saying? The formula has been blown apart. So what we're going to do that day is we're going to talk about ways for you as a church to figure it out. The key is, as a church, you have to have the conversation. When are we going to teach what it is we want to teach? What's going to get taught at confirmation? What's happening during Sunday morning worship? I think part of the burden is in worship on us to make it even more children and youth engaging. I'm not talking about traditional or contemporary service. I'm not talking about that. Brad's church is a mostly traditional service. The best children's sermon I ever heard was 2 Sundays ago at his church by Pastor Donna. The reason why it was the best children's sermon I ever heard is because it was not just an object lesson to check off the list in the order of, she didn't gear it really for the adults sitting out there, even though the adults always say, I love when we do the children's sermon. It was the best I ever heard because it took probably 10 minutes where the children were engaged, touching these wooden sticks and things that she had, figuring out how you build a shelter for Elijah, Moses, and Jesus. And then she moved right into the adult sermon. It was the best teaching I'd ever seen done. And it was experiential, and it was engaging, and it was 10 minutes of captured time. They paid attention to every single word, and so did all of us. And they found other things to skip. So anyway, let's kind of, yes?
I want to add to the believe in God statistic. That number is now down to 74%.
Because of the growth among just atheists.
Right, and the real disturbing trend is when you look at the age groups and their individual knowledge.
Right.
It starts declining, of course. In terms of religion is very important, but the older folks, 67% now. It used to be 90.
Yeah.
And now you go to the youngest group and you're at 38%.
Do you know that millennials are the first generation where the largest percentage of them see a church steeple and have a negative reaction? Whereas we all grew up thinking, maybe I'm not there on every Sunday, but it sure is pretty. I want it to be pretty when I get married, and I want it to be pretty when I have my kid baptized, and I want it to be pretty when I die and my funeral is there. But millennials, because of how we live out, I think Christians, how we live out our lives just on Facebook and Twitter. Did any of you see the trouble Andy Stanley got himself into this last couple of weeks? He got himself, look it up. I thought about showing it, and then I just asked Brad and decided to not. But he's preaching in this big old church in Atlanta, and he kind of gets on this little kick about how parents are selfish if they take their children and youth to small churches, because small churches can't do the age level appropriate programming that a large church like his can do. Well, he just created this huge firestorm. So much so that he posted a beautiful apology on Twitter. I just want to read it to you real quick because I've had tons of people ask me how I feel about this, just because of my sort of little small church guru-ness, I guess. His post was so funny. Read it later on, though, because you're going to go up and you're going to say, what, did he lose his mind? He lost his mind for a moment. He tweeted, the negative reaction to the clip from last weekend's message is entirely justified. Heck, even I was offended by what I said, and I apologize. So, anyway. Let's just for the heck of it, let's look at what's happening in youth ministry in those of us that are paid. How many of you in the room get a paycheck for doing youth ministry? 1, 2, 3. I know Chandra does. 4. Did I get everybody? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so 5 out of 11 churches here today? 12? That actually is a fairly large percentage. Now, none of those 5 of you that raised your hand, you aren't the pastor also, right? You're paid to do youth. And how many of you are paid just for youth ministry? Or are you doing youth and children's? Just youth ministry, raise your hand. 1 and 2. Okay. And those of you that get a check for doing what you do, where it's not just youth ministry, what else is in your job title, out of curiosity? Children and youth? That's becoming very widespread, necessary even in bigger churches. Churches are running out of money. And the combination job is much more appropriate than having no one in the job. Okay, so we're going to look at some statistics, and If you don't have a paid person, it's certainly because this can help you know what you might have to plan for, and just give you some more information about what's happening out there. Okay. This is the latest info out of Group Magazine's 2015 salary survey. It actually came out. Did it come out in September's issue or January's issue? Well, anyway, it's been within the last few months. 50% of youth workers in America have outside jobs. This is not just small church, this is across the board. 50% of youth workers in America have outside jobs, as compared to 10 years ago, where only 15 did. Average full-time pay for a male in youth ministry is $42,800. Average full-time pay for a female is $27,500. Let's just land for a minute. We're not going to make this about male or female. Which it could be some of, but I don't think that is what the story is here entirely. I think this is descriptive of the trend that you all can just kind of keep this in the back of your mind. These two figures, the average male and female, was a closer statistic in the 2012, 2010, 2008 was the closest it ever got, as then, the narrowest margin. Never have they been the same, but we get it. We don't like it, but we get it. What I think is happening here, just based on my consulting with churches all around the country, is that more and more churches are hiring the one person to cover children in youth ministry. More and more churches are hiring from within the church for those combo jobs. And in that, then, more and more cases, women feel more comfortable straddling both children's and youth ministry than when hiring from within men do in doing both children and youth ministry. Does that make any sense? It doesn't make the discrepancy right, it just explains it a little bit. Feedback or pushback or comment?
Do you have anything as far as within the Methodist Church? Because, just what I've seen.
Yeah, if you go back to that salary survey, it broke it down regionally, it broke it down by years of experience, it broke it down denominationally, and most of the mainline churches run along course their average.
I was just wondering, because I know, for example, in certain denominations, I see that instead of it being, it'll be a youth pastor if it's a male, but if it's a female, it'll be like a youth ministry assistant. Or
that certainly happens.
And I know we typically don't in our denomination because, of course, we're inclusive, but female serving in any ministry role a male can. So.
The youth pastor terminology has changed greatly. When I first got in 1980, I didn't really realize women weren't in youth ministry. I just got in because, God told me to. Really, I just thought it was a part-time job till my ship came in. Women weren't in youth ministry, but then the term youth pastor was in mainline denominations not allowed at all because you weren't ordained, so to speak. Now it's a pretty loosey-goosey, and not many people care that much. We say youth pastor, youth director. Still happens sometimes. Okay, average age of the full-time youth worker, or the youth worker rather, is 35. The average stay is 4+ years. This is much better than it used to be. By the way, that whole 18-month, remember that it is strictly an urban legend. Never was true. It was, even when it originally was said tongue-in-cheek. But the statistics for how on staff people is getting better. Here's the problem. Even the last time the survey came out 3 years ago, the average stay was 3.9 years. Now it's up to 4.2. Great. But a full youth ministry cycle takes 4.5 to 5 years for it to complete itself. And so still, if a youth pastor, youth director leaves before complete sustainability is put into place, it does often have the church just starting all over again. I mean, I deal with it every day. Youth pastor leaves, volunteers go into their desk and try to find a data sheet. Can't find it, don't know who was going where, who are the actives, who are the inactives. But we're going to work on all of that this year so that if your leader all of a sudden gets run over by an ice cream truck, A, wouldn't that be the way to go? B, if your leader had to step away or got run over by an ice cream truck, the idea we're looking for is that your ministry is sustainable. Somebody could go to one central location, whether it be an actual physical desk or that Google Drive, and say, everything is there. We can probably subsist for 6 months while we look for another leader. Okay. Average salary in a small church, 10 students or less, is $16,000. Knowing that many small churches don't have someone on staff. But we're going to look through some numbers and norms that I want you to know that if you could hire someone, these would be sort of the way you would figure how much you need and how much it would cost if you ever got to that point. Okay, so the next slide we're going to look at is what Ministry Architects calls rents. And it's the kind of dues you have to pay to get towards sustainability, to get people to like what it is that's happening in the youth ministry. And my best example of paying a rent is for the pastors in the room. If yours is a church that does have a traditional service and a contemporary service, this is the best example I think I can come up with, the idea of a rent. When you preach and teach at the traditional service, unless it's summertime, normally you pay the rent of wearing your robes. Folks come expecting you to wear your robes. That's part of what they like to see in a traditional service. In a contemporary service, the rent a pastor would pay is not wearing robes. Because the folks that come, the average people that come to a contemporary service would actually feel more comfortable if the pastor was dressed a little bit more like they are. So, that's not true in every case, but it's the best example. So, here's what we're looking at in youth ministry. If a church is paying the rent of numbers, we don't mean that you're paying some rent by having these great, large, big numbers. That doesn't call the rent paid successfully. What we mean is that in your church and among your teams, you're now going to begin to have the conversation as a church, because the youth ministry of your church is the responsibility of the church. Not the pastor, not the youth director, but the church itself made vows when each child was baptized that we would so order our lives after the example of Christ to surround this child, blah, blah, blah. So, the youth ministry responsibility is the church. The church then needs to decide, what are our target numbers for youth ministry going to be? What is the number we want to shoot for? Because without that, here's what happens. We'll do an assessment somewhere. In fact, I'm doing an assessment this next weekend in the Philadelphia area. And I can guarantee, and it's a United Methodist Church, Yardley United Methodist Church in Yardley, Pennsylvania. I can guarantee you that in some form or fashion, at least 10 people in one of my 12 listening groups will say to me, I remember the day when we used to have 100 kids come through these doors. I remember the day when we used to have 50 kids. We bought a foosball table. We ought to be having 20 kids here every single Friday night. We got a foosball table. We invested in putting couches in the youth room. Invested meaning they went to Goodwill or they got them from, every grandma. And so churches have in their minds what a number should look like. But the problem is, if you don't lead your church to set it together, every person in your church is going to have a different idea of what that number should look like. Do you see what I'm saying? And the problem is that every person sets a different number, and then every person is unhappy when the number isn't the number they think it should be. So not only do they not agree with the numbers among each other, but they generally turn around and are unhappy with the youth ministry leadership because the number doesn't meet what they want. Much better then that you as a church decide this will be our target number. This is the number we want to hit for this year. This is the number we want to hit for the next year, and da-da-da-da-da. Okay? That makes sense? And we're going to, on our next slide, I'm going to give you the norms that you can have for figuring this all out, and then save you from spending about $2,000 or $3,000 in having ministry architects come in, do an assessment, and figure it for you. So you're going to get it all for free. It's costing the conference money, but y'all are going to get it. The next rent is, I see this especially in small churches, or I wonder if it's just more visible in small churches. For you to have the right to be able to experiment and do some wackadoodle new idea in youth ministry, you have to have paid the rent of having at least one program that everybody feels good about. There's buzz about this one. It's exciting. We like what's happening. So we're going to give this youth ministry a chance because they've already proved themselves with this. Does that make sense? So you have to have paid the rent. And the problem I think will happen, and we'll talk about this as we go through the year, is that in small churches we're still trying to hit the magic formula of critical mass. How do we get enough kids to make something work? So it didn't work this way, maybe we'll try it that way. We're going to do youth group. We're going to try having youth group, but for the beginning, we're just going to do it once a month. Well, first of all, let me tell you, once a month doesn't work. But anyway, we'll get to that some other time. But then, we still don't build credibility because on one month it's the first Sunday, and another month it's a different Sunday, and then we skip 1 month, and then kids don't feel the consistency and parents don't feel the consistency, and it doesn't work. The third thing is, and I think this is something we can do something about, paying the rent of joyful enthusiasm. We must teach our church members to not go around like this about the youth program. I don't know what we're going to do. We only have 3 kids coming. We tried that lock-in thing and only 6 kids showed up. We baked 12,000 dozen cookies. I don't know what happened. Listen, no, if you offered a free cruise to somebody, nobody wants a free cruise on the Titanic. Nobody's jumping on that cruise ship. Nobody wants to come to a youth group where church members walk around going, I don't know what they're doing over there, but we just can't seem to get any kids coming. The entire church has to have a joyful enthusiasm. Now, you know that things are going great, but the biggest challenge is that you have to find a way to feed stories of positive progression. You have to have cheerleaders in every different ministry area that you're intentionally feeding, like the story of starting out with 3 kids and now they're up to 25. Well, actually, if you started out with 3 kids and you were up to 5, you'd spread that story. You'd be like, man, we got 5 kids coming. We've grown by 66%. Is that right? Yeah, I figured. I'm pretty, not smart. But my mom, the quintessential little old lady, in church, she'd go, man, they've grown by 66%. I don't know what's going. They got 5 kids coming. Because of the way we said it is the way that other people will repeat it. And so, you know, how many of us in here are part of United Methodist Women? You know, it's, yeah, all the pastors. You know, everybody knows, if you want something to get around the church quick, right? You know what I'm saying? Just tell the United Methodist Women, God love them. So the reality is, they're gonna talk about the youth program anyway. Let's just give them great stuff to talk about. And that rent payment of joyful enthusiasm. Okay, so this next slide is the money shot. Here is what I want you to think about. And I'm going to give you a chance to do some of the number figuring. But when churches hire us to come in and do on-site consultations, this is at the core of what they want us to figure. And so, discuss amongst the people from your church. I want you to figure out this number. Bullet point number 1. Figure out or agree upon what your average weekly worship is at your church. Because, you know, you might not know it. But what I want you to think about is, what is the average weekly worship? Because a healthy target number for youth ministry is 10% of that average weekly worship. And so hear me carefully in this number. Let's say, for an example, you have 100 in worship every week. Your church can and should reasonably expect to be able to see at least then 10 students involved in the life of your church. And here's how you count those. This is just youth ministry. So if youth ministry is 6 through 12, which I really love when your youth ministry matches the school system as well. So if your kids go to school at 7 through 12, then, you know, make your youth ministry 7 through 12. If the majority of them are 6 through 12, make your youth ministry 6 through 12. This number does not cover children and youth ministry. There's a separate set of statistics for children's ministry, and I can give you those if you want. But how you count students is not those on your rolls, but how many unique, count them just one time in an average week. And this is a good time period to do it because, you know, school's not out, it's not post-Easter yet, because everything kind of goes, you know, after Easter. It's going to be weird this year too because Easter's so early. So I'm wondering if we'll just hold on to things or if we're just going to use it as an excuse to, you know, kind of check out earlier. Not that any of us would. But the students, who you count is on an average week, how many students do you see in Sunday school or at youth group or at worship? Because you've got youth that'll come to worship that don't come to Sunday school and may not come to youth group, but they're at worship, and that means they're part of your youth ministry. Youth leaders should still be trying to shake their hand and get to know them and be in ministry to them. You may have youth that help in the children's ministry and don't come to youth group. So you kind of just, on an average week, how many come through the doors, no one counted twice. You kind of get what this is? So I'm going to have you spend some time doing that. What's your average weekly worship? And then how many students do you have coming through the doors on an average week? All right? Go ahead and work on that at your tables.
This year we've got we had a
Students as in just youth, those in your youth program. You wouldn't count children, just students. So 6 through 12.
So Adam should be able to make 7 and have her in the first count.
How you doing? Need another minute or so? All right, folks. Let's kind of do some of the math together. Who wants to start by sharing what you came up with, and/or any questions, etc.? Who wants to go first? Yes. Which church?
First Mount Baptist in Mount Pleasant.
Oh, Mount Pleasant just sounds like sweet.
It is. It is so sweet.
Okay, so what's your average weekly worship?
95.
95. So a good target number would be 9 or 10 students. What'd you come up with?
7.
So what we would say, now you counted Sunday school, you counted worship, you counted, like sometimes you'll have kids that work in the nursery that don't do anything else. So you,
Yes, ma'am.
okay, so now don't feel bad about it. 7 is, close to 9. And we would, if we were doing that report, we would say this is below expectation, but we also have, we would actually probably name that as slightly below. We wouldn't name it as below, or we have another category that we would name really underperforming. I have a church I'm working with in Houston. It's got 9,200 members. It's got 535 kids on their roll, 387 what they would call active, and the problem is right now they only have about 20 students coming through the doors of the youth ministry. Those are numbers that are way underperforming. So good. Okay, what else? Who else? Yes. You have 65 in worship on a Sunday.
And an average of 22.
22 youth. Let's because my first example of that would be suspect, but that doesn't mean that that's the case. So, no one was counted twice. I'm guessing then that you have a Wednesday night or some kind of midweek program that gets a lot of community kids.
And those kids are also active on 32.
But you didn't count any of them twice. So in a given week, you've got 22 individual students. What's your total on the rolls, like if you were going to mail everybody?
On the rolls?
Yeah.
You want to go back to 1800?
No. You should have a mailing list right now of active church. Everybody should listen to this because this is true for you as well. You should have a mailing list, and on this mailing list is youth of active church families, youth of inactive church families, and then active visitors. So you've got 22.
My question on that, when you say active families, the majority of our youth are not church families.
Right. Herein lies a fine teaching point. Hear me. You absolutely get to count those 22. Absolutely. What we have to teach our churches is to stop using the phrase, our youth and the community youth, or whatever the phraseology is. We have to stop, we have to figure out how to help them see it differently. If that means Brad and I come to each of your churches and smack you down, we'll do it. But, right, wrong, good or bad, whatever the intent is, our church members, especially our older ones, grew up in this system where people join a church. We become members of the church. So we're kind of suffering the byproduct of that. And we grew up in a system where, back in the good old days, we'd host VBS, and guests would come, and if they didn't already belong to a church, they and their families would start coming to ours. Well, that doesn't work like that anymore. And so we still have people, though, who say, well, how many of those 22 are our kids? So we have to let our churches know, well, they're part of our ministry, so all 22 of them are our kids. Well, we don't see them on Sunday morning. Well, we don't see a whole lot of people on Sunday morning.
Amen.
Are they any less than our members? And I don't think that church members, I don't think they mean to do it. I think it's a constant educational program. It's a constant letting them know initially that our language is going to change, and then always pushing them back towards the language change. And kind of just re-educating folks. Because we still go to churches where they're measuring the success of a youth program based on youth group, and that matrix doesn't work anymore. Okay, and somebody else's numbers. Yes, which church?
Somerville United.
Woo!
And we have 80 adult.
So you have average worship of 80,
We
okay?
have about 10 youth.
So you're doing great. So in those 10 youth, that's 6th through 12th grade? And no one was counted twice. Where do the majority of them come? Sunday mornings? Come to both? What? Sunday school. Do you have youth group? Sunday nights or Wednesday nights or something? So right now those 10 are coming to Sunday school and or worship.
Yeah, we've got what, 6 or 7 in Sunday school.
6 or 7 in Sunday school, and then the rest
Are going to worship. So I'm not at your church, and of course we're going to kind of tear all of this apart a little bit more when we coach. My sense would be that your church members would be surprised to hear that I would call that a great number. My sense would be that church members would love to see more, and they'd like to see, I'm guessing, maybe I'm wrong, they'd love to see programming beyond Sunday morning. That they'd like to see, they don't know what it looks like, but my guess is that they'd like to see what they know as traditional youth group, whether it's Sunday night or Wednesday night or something. That's my guess. Does any of that ring true?
Yeah.
Because in their minds, that's where the only spot real youth ministry happens. But I'm seeing this change on Sunday morning. You know, as churches are struggling with the matrix, or actually that we've blown up the matrix of what's happening, I'm seeing some churches do some phenomenal youth group that happens to meet on Sunday morning. And then I've seen a lot of churches struggle through Sunday school that kids want to shoot themselves. But they go because that's what their family does. Do you know, am I wrong? You know, anybody ever have kids, or you ever go to Sunday school yourself when you were a kid? You just go. I'm only here for one reason, and the one reason is the pastor is also my dad. Okay, who else?
I have something to share kind of special about our youth group, is that we had, obviously we, grew pretty quickly, but then we had a group of kids who we didn't have Sunday school, and they asked for Sunday school. And then when they decided they wanted to
Your kids must be like pod people.
they're pretty spectacular. But the thing that was really cool about it was the agreement wasn't going to be that we were going to have Sunday school and I was going to teach it too. They teach Sunday school. They volunteer, they take turns, and they prepare a lesson to teach their peers.
Awesome. Well, awesome. Especially if it's going well, and if you're there. There's so much you can work with that. Who else? Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Rose.
Rose. Oh, you're so pretty.
First United Methodist in Lawrenceburg,
Okay.
and we have 133 average
On Sunday?
and we have 11.
So you're real close. You can expect to see about 13. You're real close. And we're going to go through these numbers. We don't have to go around everyone, but you all received an information form. It was called a pre-coaching thing. I think we got some of them back. They need to go back electronically, back to Julie or to me, I guess. Either way, it's just that by the time of our first coaching call, we're going to go through all of that information and kind of look at where your numbers are. Here's point number 1. You may only have 8 kids, and so you think, why keep an attendance sheet? Well, you're wrong. You've got to keep some kind of electronic tracking system, and that's going to be one of our tech times. I think next time is how to do cloud-based attendance tracking, data management, because here's why. Numerous reasons. How can you know who to reach out to is missing in action if there aren't a number of you keeping track of who's missing in action? How can you show exactly what your numbers and percentages are if you don't have a system that everybody's sort of giving input to? So in the Google work we're going to do this year, and for some of you, this is going to be like you could just take a nap during that time. Just leave your eyes open. Pretend like you're listening to the sermon. We're going to show you how to keep good contact info and how to have, you want your Sunday school teachers to put in that information. You want, if you've got youth that go to choir, you want that choir person to track that information. You want, because the reason is you've got to know when they showed up missing. When church council comes to you and says, we hear that the numbers aren't doing so good, you can say, well, I don't know, let me look in the Google Drive right here. Oh, here's exactly who we have coming exactly when. And whether your numbers are good or not, at least you're all going to be dealing with the right numbers. Having good check-in, check-out system greets your first-timers really well. So it's important that you know who your students are. Mark DeVries tells this story. Turns out, I don't know if it happened. He makes stuff up. I don't know. Have any of you ever met Mark DeVries anywhere? He's from Nashville. He's the president of Ministry Architects, and so I should probably shut up. But anyway, he tells the story. He's got 3 kids. He and his family, his wife Susan, they take the 3 kids to Disney World, and everybody's old enough to go on their own, so they say, hey, meet back here at the popcorn machine, because there's a popcorn machine right inside the gate at Disney World. Meet back here at 10 o'clock. Well, their son Adam is now the youth pastor at First Pres here in Nashville. Took over Mark's job, actually, and Adam always has, and his name should have been ADDAM. Because Adam is amazing, but he is attracted by squirrels. So 10 o'clock comes, Mark's there, Susan's there, the 2 girls are there, there's no Adam. Take a quick count, Mark says, okay, well we got 2/3 of our kids, this is good enough. We got 3 on our list, 2/3 are here. That's successful. Let's go. And Susan says, yes, but that one that's missing, that one's ours. And he tells it to make the same point, that we have to know who we're missing. So that's why, we have to be able to track this. Okay, let's go on in some of the numbers. The second bullet point, by the way, is you will probably not go beyond 20%. So if 10%, if your figure at 10% was you should have 13, you're probably not going to go beyond 26. If you do, then you got some other things that will happen. So, like in y'all's case, because you have what would you say, like 55? No, 65. You said 65. So you could say like 7 students, and you'd be doing great. But you've got 22. So here's what happens. Once you get past the 20% ceiling, a church has to become really, almost singularly focused on making that ministry happen. Because you now, if you didn't have enough budget before, you sure don't now. If you've always been a small church with a small church facility, you've run out of space. Unless you were once a larger church that shrank, and then you might have space. You could, the amount of staffing for that, because, just off the top of my head with 22 kids, you need to have staffing for at least a half-time job. And so all kinds of other quirks start happening. And a church has to decide at that point in time, once you get past the ceiling, we can either handle this and just go all out, or it'll eventually, like water seeks its own level, eventually, without dealing with those particulars, it generally shrinks back down. Yes?
My trustee chair in one church, when we were attracting a lot of kids from the community, came to me and said, "Where are you finding all these kids?"
Yeah.
Which was to say, we don't know if we have room for them. We don't know if we have room.
Yeah, and I none of them, and they would really, if you got down at the layers of what they're thinking, they want them there. People get scared about facilities. I'd like to challenge them. I'd be more scared of having to turn the lights out as the last person leaves than the facilities. Things are done different. Kids are going to come in and wear hats inside the building. Oh, my Lord. Yes?
I think at first that was exactly where we were. The church was just kind of, they didn't know how
To deal with how to react.
But what we've seen is a complete shift where now the church has embraced.
You betcha. And your job may be, and Pastor Thomas too a little bit, your job may be repeating the same message over and over again to church members and putting them back to, this is a good thing, and here's the steps we have in place. You aren't going to have the luxury for a while of being able to say it once or twice and people get it. All of your greatest things you can do is in educating the church that growth is painful, it's messy, it sure is worth it. Which do we care more about, clean floors or clean lives? And just but the more and more you engage them in one-on-one ways, not just cookie bringers, which I think, we all need to bring cookies. But my mom went with me to sort out the prize buckets at our church. I volunteer for the nursery. And she went with me to sort out the prize buckets. And she actually got to interact with some of the kids. And it changed her whole perspective. Because now, even though she's 80, it's hard to be mad at kids making noise in church when she knows their name. And she knows how adorable they are. Okay, let's keep on going, because lunch is in about 8 minutes. Okay. We have found for good span of care that if you want to plan ahead for how much staffing you should have, many of you can't afford it, but maybe one day you can, that there should be one full-time worker, full-time meaning 40 hours, for every 50 students, not 50 students on your rolls, but back to that active weekly figure. So if you've got 22, 25, that's where I quickly came up with the matrix of that's at least a half-time job, 20 hours a week dedicated towards youth ministry. So you can just kind of split it out from there. If you've got 25, you need 20 hours a week. If you've got, for 10 hours a week, you could effectively minister to about 12 or 13 students and kind of keep doing the math from there. Okay. The fourth bullet point is when you're trying to figure out how many volunteers you need. First of all, those of you that are the volunteer leaders, directors, you don't get to get counted in this figure. But for good eye-to-eye span of care, let's go, you've got 25 on Wednesday nights. You should have at least 5 adults there, which happens to nicely match, a good insurance policy formula. But for good ministry, eye-to-eye talking to kids, you want to have 5 adults. And not just adults that are setting up supper, which are wonderful adults. Those are our support levels. These are adults that are willing to sit by the kids and talk with them and just hang out and ask them how the wrestling match went. And I got to hear all about Colin's state tourney and, everything that happened to him in the state tournaments. And, not that I'm volunteering for Brad's youth ministry, but it was a conversation we had last night. The kind of adults that are just sit there and just listen to what's going on, okay? Volunteer leaders, you can't count yourself in this mix, and here's why. You're the leader, so you have leader stuff to do. Big money, you just paid me to say that. The best example I've had of this is if you are the leader, let's say you got 25 kids, and you're the leader, and you got another adult there, and there's just 2 of you. Well, first of all, that's a recipe for potential disaster. It's not enough adults. But it's 1 for every 12, 13. However, one of those middle school kids jumps off the stage in the fellowship hall and breaks their leg, and you now as the leader have to be the one that rides with them to the emergency room. Because you are under-volunteered at that program, you have now just left only 1 adult with 24 other kids to go through the process of pickup and emergency. So it just doesn't make sense, and it's not good ministry. It's just not good relational building ministry. Okay? The last figure. Is if you want to plan ahead for how much it would cost to, how much budget money you need to set aside for both, for the youth ministry budget, both part-time salary and program expenses would be about $1,000 a head. It gets a little mushier when you get to be in small church settings because there's a lot of people, like if you have 12 kids in your youth group and it would take about 10 hours worth of staffing, in a lot of churches that size, someone will volunteer for 10 hours a week. They'll go, volunteer. Even though I work a real job, I got 10 hours I can devote to this. I got like 5 or 6 hours I can do on a Sunday, and I can do the other 4 hours from home at night, that kind of thing. But that 1,000 per head, let's go back to your figure of 22. So our matrix would say you need to have in monies that the church spends both for salary and for expenses about $22,000 for your size program. Does that make sense? The 1,500, it says 1,000 to 1,500. I wouldn't worry about that because first of all, I know the cost of living in this area enough to know that I think you can be safe with saying 1,000 in the planning ahead. It'd be nice. I realize it'd be nice to have that kind of budget. Some of our churches here in this room, maybe you have $100,000 total budget a year for your church. So there's no way you could carve out $8,000 or $10,000 for a youth ministry budget. This is just for you to plan ahead if you were going to pay salary and the expenses involved. Does that make any questions? Thoughts? Okay. Let's spend then a couple of minutes on this, our last 5 minutes, on talking about what the biggest advantages are or disadvantages to being in a small church setting. So what I'd like you to do is you have 2 minutes. When I say go, each of your church teams, I want you to, in that 2 minutes, brainstorm the longest list possible of advantages to being in a small church and doing youth ministry and disadvantages to being in a small church and doing youth ministry. All right? So it can just be one list, but you're answering both categories. Ready? On your mark, get set, go. Eight, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, okay, heads down. So I'm going to show you my list, and then you can. It's kind of like categories. If you had something along these lines, just cross it off, and then we'll see what's left over. So here is my list. Short, but I think 5 of the sweetest advantages of having a small church youth ministry. You know every kid. In fact, not only can you know every kid's name, every adult member of your church can and should know every kid's name. And the burden rests on the adults, not on the youth. Number 2, there's enough time for those turf visits we all talk about. Now, here's where I think this is exciting being a small church. You know how we always say go to the kids' games or go to the kids' musicals, etc. One of the things that small churches struggle with is what and how much is too much to put on the church calendar. So I think in a small church, we just need to kill a bunch of birds with one stone. And that is, for an example, we got spring's coming up. You know, it's going to be the end of the year musicals and end of the year concerts. Why not make those a church-wide event? Have dinner and a show. Dinner, you know, and a lot of your old folks would love this, especially if you put the trip together for them so they didn't have to drive themselves there. But, you know, somebody took the old folks to the Bob Evans for dinner and then to the school to watch the annual spring musical. And then these kids that are in the spring musical look out and all of a sudden there's 20 people from their church sitting there watching the show. You've provided programming. You've done the turf visits. Everyone's happy and you just sent a message to the community of this is who we are. Now, to translate that formula to your setting, whatever it would make sense, but like even the football game, I think half the time if we would just put the details together for folks, our folks would show up. Like my favorite thing, now I may be a little odd, my favorite turf visit is middle school orchestra concerts. Because they are so horrible. They're fun. Do you know what I'm saying? Now maybe I'm wrong. Maybe your kid's the best orchestra player in the world and Yo-Yo Ma should watch out. But otherwise they're pretty lousy. They're so lousy it's terrific. But wouldn't it feel just really good? I mean, Mom, I'll go back to my mom. She would love that. She just wants to, she would be scared to go to the high school herself. She wouldn't know where to go in. But if somebody were driving vans that got to the closest door possible that was the most accessible, and somebody was there to show them how to get in, They would love it, and it's a cheap date. And you've just done a bunch of cool stuff. Another advantage is it's easier details with a small church. It's just much easier to take 12 kids on a retreat. Much easier to plan 12 kids coming to warmth and winter than it is to get 50 kids to warmth and winter. Not only is it much easier, I've now seen Opryland, where next warmth and winter's location is. Not only is it gorgeous, there are more places for kids to hide. I'm so glad I'm not bringing anybody. Actually, that's maybe not true. I might bring my husband and my daughter might come, but I don't know. Okay, number 4, it's so much easier to make course corrections. I keep thinking one day that Toby Mack's going to call me, like I even know him, and he's going to say, hey, yo, I got like 12 free tickets to my concert tonight. And I can call my youth group at the drop of a hat and go, we're going to go meet Toby Mack backstage. You can't do that with 1,000 kids in a youth program. But you can do that with 12. Okay, and then last, advantages. I think in a smaller youth group, they're less fussy. I think they're just willing to have fun and a good time with each other. Real quick, some struggles, and then we'll end it here and go to lunch. In a small church setting, there are less people to draw from, and there are less resources available. If I come home from a mission trip, and if I went to a church with 1,000 people, I bet I could find 2 or 3 with video editing abilities. But if there are 80 people in our church, there's less of a chance for me to find somebody with video editing abilities. So there is a little less to draw upon. It is iffier having critical mass for things. The secret is don't plan any event in a small church where you have to have a minimum number. I made the mistake of advertising a water park event, thinking surely I'm going to get 15 kids to go. I got 9 kids solid. They're going to bring friends. Surely we'll get 15. Then I'll get the lower price and the 2 free adult tickets. I should not have done that. We still went, but I had to eat all that cost. What would have been much better is if I had surprised them, if we had met the critical mass needs, and I had surprised them and said, here's $4 back. You know, I would look like a hero. So if you have to, if you have to have 12 to play a game and you're not sure you're going to get it, don't plan it. Does that make sense? On the other hand, if you have 2 show up and you thought 12 would show up, I don't ever want to hear you say, well, we have to cancel this, we only have 2 show up. Never, ever, ever, ever cancel based on numbers. Ever. Because you will sabotage your ministry faster than anything. Okay? I almost made a political joke right there, but then I realized I should not. But there's a couple of candidates I wish would sabotage their current candidacy, and they keep sticking around. But anyway, I don't even know what we're going to do, people. Oh, thank you. That was a good answer. God's in control. Okay, another disadvantage, varying teaching levels. You know, in a Sunday school, you got 4 kids in there, 1 6th grade weird boy. You know, he won't always be weird, but he's weird now. 2 8th grade girls, and one of them was because she spent the night with her friend. And then the senior that doesn't want to be there, but then a dad's the pastor, and so the kid has to be there. It's tougher to staff that small church, because if you do get to the point where you want to hire, it's tougher to staff it 10 hours a week, or the pool is smaller. And then last but not least, in a small church, I don't know if you know this, but there's politics in families. In churches, rather. Politics in churches. So, in a small church, if you run across that one family, you know that one family where there's 8 generations in the church? You know, there's the matriarch who's still 212 and showing up for church. And there's all the subsequent generations. And it's so great if you're the youth director and are a part of that family, But if you're not a part of that family, and you make the mistake of sending their precious daughter home because she was throwing pumpkins at passing cars during the pumpkin patch, and you made their parents mad because you sent her home, well, then it's hard to fly under the radar of that until you look for your next job.
Sounds like a personal story.
It's a personal story. Oh my word. I didn't